Gwen, right?
Gwen Stacy.
You're...
Aerith. It's Aerith.
You okay?
I'm fine. Thank you. My hero.
Never a dull moment with you.
Thanks anyway. If you could hit a target under pressure, would we have lost to Bronx Tech? You choke like a cat with a hairball. Cloud, get it together. Come on.
Do you like Francina? Like a fish?
Mm-hmm. No, I know.
Well, if you want, you can come to this address at 8 o'clock tonight.
But it'll cost you a lot.
A lot, huh? One date ought to do it. Everyone dies eventually.
I suppose. Fine. Here, let me kiss me.
So we need to make the most of the time we have. To live our lives the way we want to live.
Gentlemen, may I present Gwen Stacy?
Every minute, every moment matters. Hey,
On January 31st, 1997, Square Enix, formerly known as Squaresoft at the time, released their seventh Final Fantasy game titled Final Fantasy VII to the PlayStation console in Japan, while its North American release was on September the 7th of that same year. The game went on to become a commercial and critical success. It's often been credited for popularizing Japanese role-playing games worldwide. Unlike the previous 6 Final Fantasy games, Square made sure to heavily promote this game overseas, and they didn't do it alone, as they had help from Sony, even going so far as to launching a 3-month advertising campaign which involved numerous articles in both gaming and general interest magazines, advertisements and comics from publishers such as DC and Marvel Comics, a special collaboration with Pepsi, media events, sample disc, and merchandise.
An evil empire is sucking the life force from the planet, destroying all that's in its path. It's up to one soldier of fortune to save the world. If he succeeds, you survive. If he fails, you can always hit the reset button. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
Beyond the edge of reality lies a story of ultimate conquest, a story of war and friendship, a story of a love that can never be, and a hatred that always was. And now, the most anticipated epic adventure of the year will never come to a theater near you. Final Fantasy VII.
PlayStation.
And it definitely paid off, as I mentioned before, since it became a smash hit worldwide. Within 3 days of its release in Japan, Final Fantasy VII sold over 2 million copies. In the game's debut weekend in North America, it sold 330,000 copies and had reached sales of 500,000 copies in less than 3 weeks. According to Weekly Famitsu, Final Fantasy VII sold 3.27 million units in Japan by the end of 1997. By September 2023, it's been stated that the original version of FF7 has sold over 14.4 million units worldwide. It was referred to by Game Fan as quite possibly the greatest game ever made, being a quote selected for the back cover of the game's jewel case. The game was given numerous Game of the Year awards in 1997. It was awarded Game of the Year by magazines including Informer, GamePro, and Hyper. Since 1997, it has been selected by many game magazines as one of the top video games of all time, listed as 15th in Game Informer's 2009 top 200 games of the year, listed 4th in Retro Gamer's top 100 games in 2004. It ranked as 2nd in Empire's 2006 100 greatest games of all time. GameSpot placed it as the second most influential game ever made in 2002. And just recently, in 2024, it was ranked as first in WatchMojo's top 10 best Final Fantasy video games. Among the factors that made the game so iconic was the fact that it moved away from the two-dimensional graphics used in the first 6 games to 3-dimensional computer graphics. The game features polygonal characters on pre-rendered backgrounds. It also introduced a more modern setting, a style that was carried over to the next game. It's hard to believe now, but back in the day, these graphics were considered revolutionary. Just goes to show how far we've gotten in terms of technology over the 27 years since the game's release. And unlike the previous entries, Final Fantasy VII introduced more widespread science fiction elements and a more realistic presentation. The other factors being gameplay, its music, the story, and of course, its characters. Among them being Aerith Gainsborough, who, despite not technically being the main character, is arguably the most important character in the story, and a character that many gamers fell in love with, which made this scene so damn painful to watch for the first time. Now, recently, I did do a video evaluating the iconic death scene, as well as debunking some myths surrounding it. So I'll leave a link to that video in the description below if you want to check it out. But anyways, Aerith's death shook not only the world and the characters of Final Fantasy VII, but the gaming medium as a whole. Prior to this, gamers had a completely different understanding of death in the medium. Unlike in gameplay, when a character dies, it wouldn't matter as long as you could just reset and try again, or revive them with a phoenix down. Here, in the game's most famous cutscene, when Aerith dies, she's actually dead and doesn't get revived for the remainder of the game's story. A character dying in a Final Fantasy game or video game in general wasn't necessarily a new concept, but like I said before, this death stood out from the rest. Among the reasons being that, unlike most of those deaths, it wasn't towards the end of the story, nor was it a NPC who died, nor was it even some noble sacrifice. The original Final Fantasy VII game released on 3 CD-ROM disc, and Aerith dies towards the end of the game's first disc. Aerith was a major character in your party, who was not only your white mage, but the emotional core of the group, as well as incredibly integral to the plot. And like I said in another video, she didn't sacrifice herself. She was just murdered in cold blood. Again, check out the previous Aerith video I did if you want more a detailed explanation as to why I said that. Anyways, her death has often been regarded as the most iconic or well-known death in video game history. Her death scene has gotten so ingrained into pop culture that you don't even need to be a Final Fantasy fan to at least be familiar with this moment, as it's been referenced through various forms of media. In fact, many have argued her death has become the most important thing about her character, and in many ways, the sole reason that her character is even known today. Which somewhat reminds me of another famous character, but not from the video game medium, but from the comics instead.
In comics, the strips are often done by so many different writers. For a few months, there'll be one writer doing it, then another writer takes over, and then another artist takes over. So the characters are always pretty much in a state of flux.
Let's rewind the clock back to the 1960s, specifically August 1962. To compete with DC Comics' superheroes, Superman and Batman, who had already become icons at that point, over at Marvel Comics, which had already created popular heroes of their own, such as Captain America, the Incredible Hulk, and the Fantastic Four, the writers wanted to create a new hero who could stand out from the crowd by making them a teenager with everyday problems, like getting bullied at school or finding a date to the dance. Throw on the spider powers and you get Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker, making Spider-Man the first teenage superhero to not be relegated to being someone else's sidekick like Robin is to Batman. Created by writer/editor Stan Lee and artist Steve Ditko, he first appeared in the anthology comic book Amazing Fantasy number 15 in the Silver Age of comic books. Eventually getting his own comic book series titled The Amazing Spider-Man, and he soon became a fan favorite among the Marvel Universe, even becoming known as Marvel's flagship character. Between fighting crime and going to school, then college, he had his fair share of love interest over the many decades since his very existence, despite being written as a nerd. Peter's first official girlfriend being Betty Brant, secretary to the Daily Bugle newspaper publisher J. Jonah Jameson. Eventually, they did broke up, and he later met two of arguably his most iconic love interest of all time, Mary Jane Watson, niece to Aunt May's friend.
Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot.
Do you mean you're Mary Jane Watson?
Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot.
And Gwen Stacy, daughter of New York City Police Department Detective Captain George Stacy.
Man, you don't have me on your computer.
Yeah, I mean, like, I took a photo of the debate team, and you're in the debate team, so...
Right.
So, he must have seen... I was touching up stuff.
You're touching up stuff?
Mary Jane was initially written as a foil to Gwen, with her extorted, fun-loving personality contrasting with Gwen being more like Peter in demeanor and intellect, forming a bit of a romance triangle between the three characters. However, it was decided that Peter would choose Gwen as his girlfriend instead of MJ. And for a while, she was indeed Peter's one and only girlfriend, and seemed like it was gonna stay that way until this happened.
She's doomed! Do you hear me? Doomed. And so are you.
Gwen! No! I've got to catch her. Stop her fall before she hits the water. I've got to. I've got to! Gwen? 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 Hey kid, what's wrong? Don't you understand? I saved you. You can't be. No. Oh no, no, no. Don't be dead, Gwen. I don't want you to be dead. I saved you, honey. Don't you see? I saved you.
Now, this moment was huge, as it was not considered common for major members of a superhero's supporting cast to be killed, especially their girlfriends. In fact, Gwen Stacy might have been the first main romantic interest to die in a comic book. It's like if DC Comics had written a story where Superman had actually failed to save Lois Lane. Gwen's death became a pivotal moment in both Spider-Man's history and in American comic books in general. Many point to Gwen's death to have ended the Silver Age of comic books and jump-started the Bronze Age, which further increased the emphasis on more mature subject matter pioneered by the Silver Age. You can make the case that this event opened the floodgates for publishers to explore death in the medium. After this, no character was safe regardless of whether they were important or not. It's weird to think of a time when comic book deaths actually meant something and were unexpected as opposed to what they've become today. Nowadays, it can be argued that comic book writers have relied too much on killing major characters to further the plot, only for another writer to bring them back with some nonsense, then rinse and repeat. But yeah, this was a death that really shook the comic book industry during this time. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the death of Gwen Stacy paved the way for other legendary deaths in comics, such as Jason Todd / Robin, Alexander DeWitt, Jean Grey, Barry Allen / The Flash, Superman, and hell, even Spider-Man himself. You'll often find her death being ranked either at the top of many people's list of most iconic deaths in the comic book medium, or at least ranked very high in said list. However, just like Aerith 20 years later, Gwen Stacy had stopped becoming known for her character and rather as, quote, Spider-Man's dead girlfriend, end quote. Her death was the sole important and iconic moment of that character's existence. Which finally brings me to the point of this video. Comparing and contrasting arguably the most famous death in comic books with arguably the most famous death in video games, as well as going over the impact each of these deaths' legacies.
Well, look who it is. Talk about a coincidence.
What are you doing here?
Waiting.
Why?
Because I'm not sick of you yet.
Lead on, then.
With pleasure. Cloud? Is something wrong?
It's nothing.
As I mentioned before, I did a video discussing Aerith's death in the 1997 FF7 video game, as well as the behind-the-scenes story on it, but I'll go over it briefly here. For many fans of FF7, one of the main themes of the game was life and death. An example of this being that many of our main characters each coping with the loss of their loved ones in different ways, like Cloud, Barrett, and Tifa wanting to avenge the deaths of the people they lost, as well as the destruction of their hometowns. Then you got the gray morality behind Barrett and the rest of the Avalanche bombing the Mako reactors that led to the deaths of many innocent people due to those explosions of said reactors. According to FF7 character designer TETSUYA NOMURA, in a 2017 Polygon interview, he stated that the game's theme was life. Killing Aerith was designed to give weight to that theme. Here's something I didn't mention in my previous Aerith video when it comes to the behind-the-scenes stuff. Well, originally, Yoshinori Katatse and Kazushige Najima didn't want to kill just one party member, but they wanted to kill off most of the characters. It would have been as they were parachuting into Midgar or towards the end of the game, but thankfully Nomura talked them out of that and convinced them to just kill one, and that led to just killing Aerith. It was stated so in the Polygon interview. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Before deciding Aerith, Barrett was also considered to be the one to kick the bucket, but the producers felt Barrett's death would have been too obvious. Yeah, would have been too obvious to pick the black guy, right? Right. As for the outer universe story behind Gwen's death, created by writer Stan Lee and artist Steve Ditko, Gwen Stacy first appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 31 on December 1965. Stan Lee claimed that his wife, Joan, was the inspiration for Gwen. According to Lee, who scripted the stories featuring Gwen, the original intention was for Gwen to be Spider-Man's central love interest. However, Mary Jane's unexpected popularity with readers after her debut changed the course of the plan, as fans liked Mary Jane more and demanded she be Peter Parker's main love interest instead, and that no matter how we wrote it, Mary Jane always seemed more interesting. Jerry Conroy and Roy Thomas succeeded Stan Lee as writer and editor, respectively, of the Amazing Spider-Man. Together with inker John Romita Sr., they came to the decision to have Gwen Stacy killed. It was Romita who first suggested the idea during a plotting session with Conway when Romita was still penciler on The Amazing Spider-Man. Conway later said his contribution to the decision was motivated by a desire to bring Mary Jane to the forefront, as he shared Lee's feeling that she was a more interesting character than Gwen Stacy. Mary Jane hadn't lost the edge that made her an interesting character. Gwen didn't have an edge. She was just a nice person. And the thing is, the story had already been built for several issues with the rivalry between Spider-Man and Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, with this being intended to be the climax. And to add some real stakes to this battle, as well to the series as a whole, it was decided that someone close to Peter would die during this story. The first option was Aunt May, but was quickly dismissed due to the writers feeling like killing her off would mean Peter losing another parental figure and making him appear drastically older than what they had intended on writing him. Peter would not have to worry about her anymore and be no longer treated as a child, which is ironic because several decades later, the idea of killing off a version of Aunt May was famously used in the 2021 film Spider-Man: No Way Home. Thus, it came down to kill either Mary Jane Watson or Gwen Stacy. But because of the reasons that I already mentioned earlier, there was no way they'd kill MJ. So Gwen seemed like the only real option that made sense. As writer Jerry Conroy explained in the introduction to the book titled Web Slinger, for me, Destiny already announced Peter's soulmate the day Mary Jane Watson appeared on his doorstep. She was so obviously right for him. I always assumed Peter's relationship with Gwen was just a temporary diversion from the true path fate had laid out for him.
Well, what do you think?
I'm game.
Huh?
But
It'll be fine. We've got a bodyguard, don't forget. Mine. Right?
Ghosts aren't my thing.
You're just being modest. After you.
Mind letting me go then?
Aerith and Gwen were both part of a love triangle. For Gwen, it was with Mary Jane and Peter Parker. For Aerith, it was with Tifa Lockhart and Cloud Strife. According to co-creator Stan Lee, he had intended for Gwen Stacy to be Spider-Man's true love and introduced Mary Jane just for fun. But that somehow Mary Jane just seemed to have all the personality and much as we tried to make Gwen more attractive, we couldn't. We ourselves felt that Mary Jane ended up not only more beautiful, but more fun and interesting. And we finally decided to let Peter end up with her, but it was as though the characters had taken over. As for Final Fantasy VII, the notion of having two concurrent heroines and having the hero waver between them was something Final Fantasy VII director Yoshinori Kitase liked, described it as something new in the Final Fantasy series. When Peter met MJ, he and Gwen weren't even an official thing yet, which led to some flirting from both women towards the nerd. Meanwhile, Cloud and Tifa grew up in the same town, but by the time Cloud meets Aerith, Cloud and Tifa never even dated at that point. However, neither love triangles never ever became bitter or toxic. Despite the fact that Gwen and MJ were into the same guy, while yes, Gwen did seem a little jealous of MJ at first, ultimately the two girls became good friends. If there was a rivalry between the two, then it was definitely among the most friendliest of romantic rivalries ever made, because there was never a point where they were bickering or arguing over the same guy, and the same could be said for Aerith and Tifa in Final Fantasy VII. While admittedly there were a few moments where Tifa seemed a bit jealous of the bond between Cloud and Aerith, Tifa and Aerith were never mean to each other. And in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, the devs went out of their way to make Tifa and Aerith total besties. In fact, if I'm being honest, I low-key ship Tifa and Aerith over Cloud and Tifa or Aerith. Speaking of shipping, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, basically the slang term for shipping means to take an interest in or hope for a romantic relationship between fictional characters or famous people, whether or not the romance actually exists. So while I said that neither love triangles ever got toxic, sadly, the same can't be said for the fans when it comes to shipping wars. For years, FF7 fans have debated on who Cloud should have ended up with between Tifa and Aerith. Even back in the 1960s through 70s, the shipping wars between Peter x Gwen fans and Peter x MJ fans was crazy, and it's still going strong to this day, believe it or not. However, unlike with Final Fantasy VII, where it was completely up to the player's interpretation on who Cloud loved more between Tifa and Aerith, Peter did indeed choose between his two love interests, and it was Gwen. From an in-universe reason, it was because Peter had more in common with Gwen. Meanwhile, Mary Jane at the time was written to be more of a party girl who wasn't looking to be in any real commitment. The out-of-universe reason was simply due to Stan Lee's creative control at the time, since he favored Gwen over Mary Jane due to, as I mentioned before, Gwen being loosely based off of his wife. It's also interesting to note that while both Gwen and Aerith dressed more conservatively compared to their love rivals, however, unlike Gwen, who was less outgoing and daring compared to MJ, Aerith is actually more spunky and less shy compared to Tifa. Mary Jane Watson felt the loss of Gwen deeply and becomes a more mature, compassionate person. Gwen's death also draws Peter and Mary Jane into a closer friendship and eventually to romance, which was ultimately the Spider-Man writers' primary intention. As for Tifa Lockhart, as I mentioned before, Tifa and Aerith were good friends, so her death really did hurt her as well as the rest of the party. When developing the Final Fantasy game, after it was decided that Aerith was going to die, the character of Tifa, who prior to this was going to be an NPC with a minor role, was given the lead heroine role for the remainder of the story, as evident as she was the one who helped Cloud fix, his messed up memories. After helping Cloud defeat Sephiroth, the two would go on to live together, becoming caretakers of an orphan Denzel and the adopted daughter of Barrett Wallace, Marlene, thus becoming a family. Now, the connection between Tifa and Aerith actually goes even deeper than what I've mentioned so far. In fact, at some point in early development for FF7, Tifa and Aerith were one and the same character. If you're curious to learning what I mean by that, then be sure to check out another Final Fantasy video of mine, in which I went over in great detail the true origin story behind Tifa and Aerith. The link to that video will also be in the description. Prior to their deaths, both had lost a loved one who was also a close ally to the main protagonists of their respective stories. Both deaths greatly affected the main character of their respective story. For Peter Parker / Spider-Man, Gwen's death haunted him for years, even after dating various other women over the years since losing Gwen. And regardless of whether or not you ship Cloud with Aerith, many FF7 fans will agree that she was still a very important person in his life, and her death really messed him up. So much so that a big part of his character arc in the 2005 CGI film Advent Children, which acts as a sequel to the 1997 PS1 game, was that he was still depressed and filled with guilt over not being able to save her from getting killed. Speaking of which, both Aerith and Gwen's death have had their fair share of controversies. Ever since the Amazing Spider-Man issue 21 titled The Night Gwen Stacy Died was published in June 1977, many comic book fans have debated on who was the actual cause of Gwen Stacy's death. Was it indeed the Green Goblin or Peter himself? When the Green Goblin kidnaps Gwen Stacy and throws her off of a bridge, Spider-Man shoots a web strand at Gwen's leg and catches her, but her neck is broken by the whiplash from her sudden stop. It's important to remember that the comic features a snap sound effect next to Gwen's head in the panel in which Spider-Man's webbing catches her, which led to some fans saying that Spider-Man might have accidentally killed his girlfriend. For some time, however, you got the other side of the fandom that have speculated that the shock of the fall itself is what caused Gwen's death, due to Green Goblin telling Spider-Man in the same comic,
Romantic idiot! She was dead before your webbing reached her. A fall from that height would kill anyone before they struck the ground.
In the 1987 edition of the official handbook of of the Marvel Universe, Gwen's death is attributed to the fall, not to Spider-Man's webbing. However, in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 125, from October 1973, Marvel Comics editor Roy Thomas wrote in the letters column that it saddens us to have to say that the whiplash effect she underwent when Spidey's webbing stopped her so suddenly was, in fact, what killed her. In short, it was impossible for Peter to have saved her. He couldn't have swung down in time. The action he did take resulted in her death. If he had done nothing, she still would have certainly have perished. There's no way out. Physicist and comic collector James Calisos, in his book The Physics of Superheroes, states that in the real world, the whiplash effect would have killed her. The comic book Civil War, Casualties of War, Captain America / Iron Man 2007 concurred that the proximate cause of death was the sudden stop during a high-speed fall. An issue of Peter Parker Spider-Man revisits the issue and further confirms Gwen died of a broken neck due to the use of the webbing. In 1994, there was a mini-series comic book called Marvels, written by Kurt Busiek, which retells some of the most famous events in the Marvel Universe, but from the perspective of a news photographer, Phil Sheldon. Among those famous events does indeed include the death of Gwen Stacy. In the 4th issue, it was reported that she died from the shock of the fall. However, Phil, who witnessed the incident, is unsure about exactly what kills her. Now, if you were to ask me, I'd say, as much as it hurts me as a huge Spidey fan to admit this, yeah, given all the evidence, it does seem like the web slinger, in his attempt to save his girl, might have accidentally killed her. Now, with that said, I still hold the Goblin very much responsible for her death. That's why whenever I do hear people say the Green Goblin killed Gwen Stacy, I don't always correct them like some comic book nerds will do, because although you could technically say they're wrong, but at the same time you could also say they're not wrong. After all, he was the one who kidnapped the poor girl and threw her off the freaking bridge in the first place. And unlike Peter, the maniac had every intention on killing her.
You're the creep who's going to pay! I'm going to get you, Goblin! I'm going to destroy you, slowly! And when you start begging for me to end it, I'm going to remind you of one thing. You killed the woman I love! And for that, you're going to die!
As for Aerith's death from Final Fantasy VII, similar to how comic book fans have debated on what the actual cause of Gwen's death, it's the same thing for Aerith's. Some gamers have theorized that it was Cloud who killed Aerith, not Sephiroth. But I'm not going to go really deep into that theory, because that was actually one of the myths that I debunked in the previous Aerith video I made, which again is in the description for you to if you want more details into that. But the cause of her death isn't the only thing that has fans arguing with each other. Even if you do agree that Aerith died from getting stabbed by the Masamune, another part of the debate is who was it that stabbed the flower girl. When you first witnessed the death scene, it seems like it was Sephiroth, but later on, it's revealed to have been Jenova taking on the form of Sephiroth. And up until the events of the Northern Cave, Sephiroth, the Sephiroth the party has been following, has really been Jenova in disguise, or in other words, Genovaroth. However, we later learned that even though that might indeed be the case, it seems like Sephiroth has been controlling Jenova this whole time. So even though technically it was Jenova that stabbed Aerith, Sephiroth was the one controlling Jenova to do it. So the way I see it, Sephiroth killed Aerith. However, there are other gamers who disagree and sees it as Jenova is the one calling the shots, not Sephiroth. And now that's a debate that's been going on for years. That just, there's a video that does a great job at explaining the relationship between Sephiroth and Jenova that I think you should check out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below as well. Although nowadays the death of Gwen has been praised as being one of the most impactful moments in comic book history, and a great decision made on the Spider-Man writers' part back in 1973. However, a majority of fan response to Gwen's death wasn't so positive. While some appreciated the bold move, others were horrified by the unexpected demise of a popular character. Stan Lee was consulted by Conway and Thomas and Romita about killing Gwen Stacy. When asked about how he accepted the decision, Lee said, "I was just getting ready to go to Europe on some sort of a business trip to meet somebody to discuss something about Marvel. And I think I wasn't thinking too clearly, because when they said, 'We'd like to kill Gwen Stacy,' I said, well, if that's what you want to do, okay. All I wanted to do was get them out of the office so I can finish packing and get out of there. And when I came back and found out that Gwen had been killed, I thought, why would they do that? Why would Jerry write anything like that?" And I had to be reminded later on that I had perhaps reluctantly or perhaps carelessly said okay when they asked me. Conversely, Romita recalls that Lee was already out of the country when the decision was made, and that they took a time to talk him into it. Yet Lee remained very upset. For those of you who don't know much about Stan Lee besides what I've mentioned so far about him in this video, I think it's important to note that Lee, rest his soul, had a habit of making some contradictory statements, either by stretching the truth. I mean, after all, the dude was a storyteller, or just simply misremembering things over the years. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 125 on October 1973, editorial comment on the letters page explained the creator's view. Quote, "The relationship between Pete and Gwen had been through a lot of influential ups and downs, and unless the two were to be married, there was nowhere else to take it. But marriage seemed wrong too. Peter just wasn't ready. So Jerry, Roy, and Stan debated the question. All had reached the same inescapable conclusion. Gwen's death was simply fated to happen. Events had shaped themselves in such a way that their only logical resolution was tragedy. So don't blame Jerry, don't blame Stan, don't blame anyone. Only the workings of circumstances are culpable this time." End quote. Despite that, Romita says that Marvel still received tons of angry fan mail and even some death threats.
What is happening? What is... No, this bitch is not coming back to my... I hate this game. I don't like it anymore. It's not... No, I don't like it anymore. Dude, I thought this happens at the end of the goddamn game.
That is so graphic. Oh, not the music. Oh no. Oh no. No, no, no. No. I knew it was gonna happen, but that was horrible to watch. My precious baby angel got impaled.
Meanwhile, Aerith's death in Final Fantasy VII has received a great deal of attention as well. According to Games TM, her death helped establish the popularity of Final Fantasy VII. Players commented on message boards and blogs about the emotional impact the scene held. Fans submitted a petition to Yoshinori Kitase requesting her return. According to NOMURA, death should be something sudden and unexpected, and Aerith's death seemed more natural and realistic. He said, When I reflect on Final Fantasy VII, the fact that fans were so offended by her sudden death probably means that we were successful with her character. If fans had simply accepted her death, that would have meant that she wasn't an effective character. As for the legacies each character left on their respective story was huge and is still being felt to this day. Having played a big role in the death of Spider-Man's girlfriend definitely elevated Norman Osborn's Green Goblin as Spider-Man's arch enemy. Though he seemingly met his demise in the following issue, the Goblin legacy continued to haunt Spider-Man, either through his son Harry becoming the second Green Goblin, the introduction of a brand new goblin known as the Hobgoblin in the 1980s, or more goblin personas being added to Spider-Man's ever-growing rogues gallery. In addition, a retcon during the 1990s Clone Saga determined that the original Green Goblin wasn't actually dead after all, but instead survived the events of the Amazing Spider-Man issue 122 and has been playing a behind-the-scenes role in Spider-Man's adventures since then. After that, while Norman continued his bitter rivalry with Spider-Man, He also made enemies with other Marvel heroes as well, such as the Avengers when he took over S.H.I.E.L.D. as its director, renamed it Hammer, and formed his own Avengers known as the Dark Avengers, thus becoming the main antagonist of both the line-wide Dark Reign and Sage comic book events. He would eventually be defeated, but this was still a huge development for his character. The character has been in various top villains list as one of Spider-Man's greatest enemies and one of the greatest comic book villains of all time. Spider-Man has had many great villains, but the bad blood between him and Osborn will never be topped. The original Green Goblin will forever be known as the villain who got Spidey's first true love killed. As for FF7's main baddie, Sephiroth, his status as a villain definitely got elevated within the gaming community after brutally murdering everyone's favorite flower girl, Aerith. Games Radar Plus called him the biggest cockblocker in the gaming world, as writer Shane Patterson found Aerith's character to be appealing. And due to the fact Sephiroth killed her, players were no longer able to use her. On multiple occasions, numerous game magazines, including the Guinness World Records Gamers Edition, described Sephiroth as one of the best video game bosses and best villains from both the Final Fantasy series and in video games. Dave Smith of IGN called him the heavyweight champion of Final Fantasy villains and praised his appearance and background. Compared to the other Final Fantasy villains, he's had more of an impact on pop culture, with so many appearances or references of the character being included in various forms of media. Like, for example, a famous pro wrestler known as Kenny Omega, who has made it no secret that he happens to be a big fan of video games, appeared at Japan's 2023 Wrestle Kingdom event, dressed up as Sephiroth, complete with his iconic theme, One-Winged Angel. Hell, even one of his signature moves is named One-Winged Angel. So I think it's safe to say this guy's a huge Sephiroth fan, don't you think? Again, compared to the other Final Fantasy villains, Sephiroth also probably has had the most appearances in other video games outside of the Final Fantasy franchise. Popular examples being Aerith Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, and even Smash Bros. Ultimate. Not to mention the shit tons of merchandise that Square has released based on the silver-haired character. So it could be argued that Sephiroth is perhaps the most popular Final Fantasy villain of all time, especially since he's undoubtedly become one of the most famous video game villains of all time as well. But to be clear, both Sephiroth and Green Goblin were already well-written villains. What I'm saying here is that each of them killing or at least playing a role in the death of the love interest from each of their respective stories helped cement their legacies as villains. John Romita Sr. recalls, Stan Lee's initial reaction towards Gwen Stacy's death was negative because he thought that Romita, Kanye, and Thomas had done it behind his back, and he demanded that they bring her back immediately. Thomas, Romita, and the other editorial board members, however, convinced him otherwise, stating that this would be an embarrassing silliness and could ruin the emotional impact of her death. But ultimately, Conway gave in under the condition that after reviving Gwen, he could write her out of the book as soon as he wanted to. He decided that cloning would be the best means to bring the character back. This way, we'd have Gwen back, but not really, because the real Gwen stayed dead. In the resulting story, written approximately 2 years after the story of Gwen Stacy's death, Gwen appears perfectly healthy, but with no memory of the time since her death. This story, published in Amazing Spider-Man 144 in May 1975, initiated the original clone saga. In issue 149, we were also introduced to a clone of Spider-Man himself, who would later be known as Ben Reilly, aka the Scarlet Spider, but who was the one making all these clones? Well, enter Miles Warren, a character that was already introduced in the story prior to issue 121 as one of Peter and Gwen's professors. In fact, his very first appearance, which was in issue 31, was the very same issue we got introduced to both Harry and Gwen as well. Up until issue 129, his appearances were initially limited to the occasional cameo in which he acts as a simple background to Spider-Man's civilian life as a college student. However, it was only sometime after Gwen's death that the story revealed that the professor secretly had an unhealthy romantic obsession with her. So when he learned of her murder, yeah, you can already guess the dude didn't take the news very well. You could even say he went a little cuckoo. So cuckoo, in fact, that he adopted the persona of the Jackal. Blaming Spider-Man for Gwen's death, he swore revenge on the web-slinger by cloning both Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy as his twisted way of tormenting the hero. Thus, Gwen's death gave birth to a new Spider-Man villain. And it was thanks to the Jackal that we were introduced to who would later become one of Marvel's most popular anti-heroes, the Punisher, who was manipulated by the Jackal to go hunt down Spider-Man, claiming that Spider-Man murdered Gwen Stacy in cold blood, in which we, the readers who did read issue 121, already know that's not the case. After this, we would later see multiple clones of Gwen. Unfortunately, not every clone turned out great. In fact, the very first one, created by the Jackal, turned out looking like this. Now, there is a story out there that exists. I kinda don't want to talk about it, but I feel like I kinda need to, because it is indeed irrelevant to Gwen Stacy. Just not in a good way. So, there's a story arc called Sins Past, written by this guy. Apparently reveals that Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn and got pregnant with twins, a girl and a boy, to whom she gave birth while in France, and named Sarah and Gabriel Stacy, respectively. Gwen vowed to raise the twins with Peter, and refused to allow Norman access. And an event which was quote unquote the real motivation for Norman to kill her. Before she died, Gwen told Mary Jane everything that had happened between her and Norman, but told MJ to never tell Peter. Now, understandably, Peter was very what's the best word here? Can I say upset? Yeah, definitely. He was very upset with this revelation. By the time that Peter and MJ discovered the twins' existence, they were already grown-ups, despite the relatively short time since Gwen's death. And this was most likely due to the genetic effects of their father's goblin formula. Ever since this story was published, it's been rightfully despised by many Spider-Man fans, including me, because of one, simply ill, and two, it leaves a very bad mark on Gwen herself, and definitely tarnishes any type of legacy her character had. Many, including me, have simply tried to pretend like it never existed, like it's non-canon. Thankfully, Marvel would later retcon this revelation in the pages of Nick Spencer's run on Amazing Spider-Man doing the Sinister War event. An AI version of Norman's son, Harry, reveals to Norman that he never had sex with Gwen Stacy. Gwen never got pregnant. AI Harry had hypnotized Norman and Mary Jane Watson into believing this all happened with the help of Mysterio and the Chameleon. Those twins were actually created in a lab, which explains their rapid aging, as it's not truly related to Osborn's goblin serum. They were created from the DNA of Norman and Gwen, basically clones. Thus, this was all an elaborate scheme of Harry's to torment both his father and Peter, blah, 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 blah. Point is, Gwen never did the nasty with the goblin, nor did she ever cheat on Peter. As of right now, because for all we know, next month, Marvel might come up with another dumbass retcon revealing that although Gwen might have not had an affair with Norman Osborn, she was definitely fucking Flash Thompson, Peter's high school bully, behind Peter's back. Look, obviously I'm joking, but that might actually happen. Anyways, in a 2017 story arc called Clone Conspiracy, another Gwen clone was created. But what separated this one from the others is that this one actually retained memories of the OG Gwen Stacy before her death. The reason why this matters is because it was revealed in a flashback that the real Gwen Stacy was conscious during Spider-Man and Green Goblin's battle on the bridge. She overheard their conversation and discovered Peter was Spider-Man in the process, sending her into a state of shock, thinking that her boyfriend had killed her father. Later, when Spider-Man goes to save her, Gwen wants to tell him to stay away from her, but her mouth is still frozen in shock. Also, it was also mentioned that the effects of the goblin's pumpkin gas might have paralyzed her body. The Green Goblin pushes her off the bridge while she feels nothing inside. Spider-Man caught her by a leg with a string of web, and the sudden stop in midair snapped Gwen's neck, making it difficult for her to breathe. She was still alive during the battle, with the revelation of Peter's secret identity making her die feeling betrayed. But Gwen's last thoughts were asking herself what she'd do to deserve this. And I gotta say, man, if this is indeed canon, then damn, this definitely makes her death even more tragic. Just the idea of Gwen dying, possibly hating or just disappointing in Peter, really does sadden me. Now, the story tries to convince us that even though this new Gwen seemed to be simply another clone, she's actually the real Gwen's resurrected from the dead in a clone body, but I'm not 100% convinced that's the case. Now, there is a sequel story to this that seemed to indicate that this Gwen clone indeed inhabited the real Gwen's soul, but again, I'm not completely convinced that this is true, because the little funny thing about comic books is that they tend to always contradict themselves with multiple retcons, and this could just very well be another example of that. Not that it matters anyway, because the clone ends up dying by the end of the clone conspiracy storyline. I will say, though, unlike the original Gwen Stacy, she dies her heroic death by sacrificing herself to prevent the clones of Green Goblin, Hobgoblin, and Jack-o'-lantern from getting to Spider-Man. She sets off a pumpkin bomb, killing herself along with them. There have been multiple what-if stories of the night Gwen Stacy died, in which Peter actually manages to save Gwen from dying. The first one being published on September 23rd, 1980, written by Tony Isabella. So in this alternate story, instead of shooting a web line to Gwen from the edge of a bridge, Spider-Man jumps off of the bridge himself to rescue her. Then the most recent example, which was published in 2023, had, instead of Gwen Stacy dying, but instead Spider-Man dying to save her. I do recommend giving these what-if stories a read. Again, these are treated as non-canon parallel universe stories. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that around the time of the Spider-Man comic that killed Gwen was published in the US, there were Spider-Man comics published in Mexico that didn't go that same route. The editor at La Prensa did not think the Latin American readers would accept this, as Peter's blonde love interest was widely popular in Mexico. So the Mexican Spidey series continued its own continuity with brand new stories in which Peter and Gwen Stacy were still a couple, and Gwen Stacy was still very much alive for another 60 issues, creating 45 stories and only ending in 1974 with a return to the regular US continuity when another publisher picked up the Marvel rights. As of this recording, none of those issues have yet to be officially translated into English. Several Spidey stories have either made references or echoed Gwen's death when other characters fell from great heights during Spider-Man's battles. On most occasions, he saves them by jumping after them and working with their momentum, rather than just trying to stop them with his webbing. Most notably when he jumped off the same bridge to save Sarah Stacy. In another storyline, the Green Goblin once again replays the scene, this time with Spider-Man's wife, Mary Jane Watson Parker. As with Gwen, Mary Jane plummets towards her death. Learning from his previous error, Spider-Man uses multiple web lines and catches every major joint, saving Mary Jane from suffering the same whiplash effect that killed Gwen. Gwen's death has been adapted multiple times in other media, such as TV shows and movies. Popular examples being Spider-Man the Animated Series. In the episode chapter 14, Turning Point, the Green Goblin hurls MJ off the bridge, but instead of dying, she falls through a portal, unseen to Peter Parker, believing she had fallen and perished in the water below. The episode's name is the same as the main cover caption of the first issue in the Night Gwen Stacy Died arc. At the end of the 2002 Spider-Man film, with Mary Jane again taking the role, although she did not die, Spider-Man managed to save her by jumping after her and catching her in person, subsequently battling the Green Goblin after lowering MJ to safety. Although Green Goblin dies very similarly to how he did in the comics. And then, of course, the 2014 film, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The Green Goblin, here Harry Osborn rather than Norman, drops Gwen Stacy through the top of a clock tower. Spider-Man saves her and knocks the Goblin off of his glider. The glider collides with the clock tower that Gwen is standing on, and she falls. Spider-Man catches her again, and she dangles below until the turning clock gears cut the web Gwen is hanging from, just as the Goblin attacks him. After knocking aside the Goblin, Spider-Man dives down to Gwen, shooting a web to try and save her. But even though the web catches her, her head still hits the floor of the clock tower, the impact of which kills her instantly. In a deleted scene, Peter takes Harry's glider, hoisted above his head in rage, and considers impaling him with it, but decides against it, leaving him to be arrested for her murder. The clock stops at 1:21, a reference to the issue of the comic in which Gwen died. Additionally, one of the promotional posters for the film recreated the cover of the Amazing Spider-Man issue 121 with the film's cast. The character of Gwen Stacy has continued to live on through various ways, either through her clones, flashbacks, brand new stories that take place before her death, or even alternate versions of her from different timelines or universes. A popular term for this is variants. There are multiple variants of Gwen Stacy out there in the Marvel multiverse, and the most popular one being Spider-Gwen, also known as Spider-Woman or Ghost Spider, debuting in the Edge of Spider-Verse issue number 2 in September of 2014. The event in which the original Gwen Stacy dies during the legendary fight between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin in the year 1973 takes place in Earth 616, or in other words, the Prime Universe or continuity the majority of Marvel Comics takes place in. This is the universe most Marvel fans are familiar with. This Spider-Gwen lives on Earth 65, where as a teenager she was bitten by a radioactive phantom spider and becomes Spider-Woman instead of Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man. Gwen Stacy's Spider-Woman harbors some of the classic Spider-Man personality with her own unique twist of individualism, as well as some conflicts, tribulations, and powers and abilities similar to his own. Yet, with others unique to herself, this version of Gwen became so popular, she eventually got her own ongoing series after much demand. The first issue of Spider-Gwen's experienced commercial success and was the third best-selling comic of 2015, with sales over 250,000 copies. She has gone on to become a standout character in the Spider-Verse comic series and has arguably become the most popular version of Gwen Stacy. And yes, that does include the OG version. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if modern readers or just kids in general are more familiar with this version of Gwen than the Gwen Stacy from the 1960 comics. Since her debut in 2014, the character has been a popular choice for cosplays and fan art. The creative director of Marvel games, Bill Roseman, described this Gwen Stacy variant as one of the greatest modern superhero designs. Spider-Gwen has appeared in various TV shows, video games, and is, of course, a prominent character in Sony's Spideyverse animated film franchise, voiced by Haley Steinfeld. She's even set to star in her own animated movie titled Spider-Woman that's currently in development, which serves as a spin-off to those movies. One of the things I really appreciate about Gwen's death, unlike most deaths in comics, is that it actually sticks. If you don't count the shit ton of Gwen clones and the Gwens from the alternate universe, as of 2024, Gwen, along with Uncle Ben, is one of the few characters to have actually stayed dead, and I really do hope that stays that way. But as I mentioned before, it's only a matter of time before someone at Marvel to come up with some convoluted bullshit to bring her back to life somehow, which unfortunately has become the norm for comics in the past several years, to the point that nowadays the death in comic books has almost become a bit of a joke, because us comic readers tend to count the days till it'll take for some writer to retcon a previously deceased character back into the story somehow, with some deaths lasting longer than the others. As for Aerith Gainsborough of Final Fantasy VII, though she's never been cloned, she has appeared in a collection of video games and animated features and short stories set in the world in continuity of Final Fantasy VII, otherwise known to us Final Fantasy fans as the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. She appears in the 2004 Japanese-only mobile game Before Crisis, and the 2007 PSP game Crisis Core, both of whom acts as prequel stories to Final Fantasy VII. Of the two stories, she has a much bigger role in Crisis Core in particular, due to meeting and later dating the game's main protagonist, Zack Fair. Unfortunately, by the end of the game, Zack gets killed, and Aerith, never knowing whatever happened to him, at least that's what she said in the 1997 game. But here in Crisis Core, it seems like, thanks to her Cetra powers, she was able to sense the moment he died, or at least felt something was wrong. In my headcanon, a part of her knows Zack is dead, but hasn't fully come to terms with it until she meets and gets to know Cloud in FF7. Well, regardless, I don't think she finds out what exactly happens to Zack till after she enters the live stream once she dies. Aerith makes several appearances in the CGI film Advent Children as Cloud's spiritual guide, urging him to move on with his life and forgive himself for the tragedies that were beyond his control, telling him that she never blamed him for her death. On the way to a Smile Novelia, a case of the live stream Black and White focuses on Aerith and Sephiroth's respective journeys through the live stream after the end of the game, but before the events of the film. The black section deals with Sephiroth, and the white with Aerith. After the release of the FF7 remake in 2020, some fans have speculated that this novella might also be relevant to what's going on right now in the remake project. Aerith's character has appeared in several games outside of the Final Fantasy continuity, popular examples being Final Fantasy Tactics, Dissidia 012, Final Fantasy, Little Big Planet 2 as a downloadable character model, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate as a Mii costume, and Spirit, and of course the Kingdom Hearts series, which is how I was introduced to this character. Now, there is a novella written by Benny Matsuyama, which appears in the Final Fantasy VII Ultimania guide. It has a Japanese title I have no idea how to pronounce, but is roughly translated as The Girl Who Traveled the Planet, and commonly known to fans as The Maiden Who Travels the Planet. It follows Aerith's journey through the live stream following her death in Final Fantasy VII. Unfortunately, it was never translated into English, although several popular fan translations do exist online. As Square Enix has offered no statement one way or the other, it is a matter of debate if the novella is canon. Despite being in the Ultimania in books which list other Final Fantasy VII media, including the one on the way to the Smile series, The Maiden Who Travels the Planet has been consistently omitted. However, several events in the novella closely matches with mentions in other compilation of FF7 entries. Early in the 2012 animated film Wreck-It Ralph, there is a neat little Aerith Easter egg that's on a graffiti in a subway station, which reads "Aerith lives." Now, there is a famous glitch that occurs in Final Fantasy VII, which has been dubbed by fans as the Ghost of Aerith, or simply Aerith's Ghost. Basically, there's a glitch that allows the player to see Aerith at the church in the slums after the events of the Forgotten City. While there is no explanation for either event, some fans think this isn't a glitch. This was intentional. This is widely believed to be the Ghost of Aerith. From the original release of FF7, it became a subject of numerous urban legends on the internet, many of which were connected to Aerith's demise. Ever since 1997, rumors have circulated that Aerith can be resurrected in, or that the original plan was to have her come back. But this was scrapped in development. NOMURA has categorically stated that neither of these rumors were ever true, as he said that the world was expecting us to bring her back to life, as this is the classic convention. A lengthy petition asking for Aerith's revival by Japanese players were sent to Katase, but he dismissed it, pointing out that there are many meanings in Aerith's death, and her revival could never happen. Despite this, to this day, many fans still believe this rumor, which over time has become a legendary myth and hoax among the gaming community. A popular example being 2019 YouTube video made by Oddheader that claimed to have finally figured out a way to revive Aerith in the OG FF7. The video blew up, but unfortunately, many failed to take into account what day this video was released on. Yeah, so it turned out to be another hoax. Some caught on to the joke, while others were either sad or pissed off. To his credit, Oddheader did include some really neat Easter eggs that were indeed true. Like, for example, if you hack into a debug room, you'll come across a giant Aerith who can transport you to different points in the game by picking from a list. The final entry on the list is Hades. If you select this, Aerith will say the player isn't sent anywhere after this statement because they already in Hades. The fact that the debug room exists in a series of black endless voids is likely the reason for Aerith's statement. What's creepy about it is that the debug room was never meant to be seen by players. It's just a bizarre in-joke intended for the developers and localization team. The fact that Aerith is the one giving this statement, knowing her fate in the story, makes it all the more creepier. With that said, there have been gamers that have figured out ways to keep Aerith in their party as a playable character, either through some mechanical glitch, hacking into the game, or through simple modding. But regardless, she's still not in any cutscene past the Forgotten Capital and has no role in the story. The story still remains the same. It's only through gameplay you can keep Aerith around, but she has no dialogue at this point in the game. That was until a gamer known as Sega Chief, who has become very popular for creating some really interesting FF7 mods called New Threat. But perhaps his biggest feat for many gamers is creating a mod that finally makes a rumor that has existed since the 1990s true, in which you can save Aerith. This mod not only keeps Aerith in your party till the very end of the game, but it basically creates an alternate scenario in the story where Aerith actually lives, which meant that Sega Chief had to not only add her character model to scenes she wasn't originally in, but to also rewrite the script of the remainder of the game to acknowledge her survival. Now, Aerith's death was heavily referenced throughout FF7's sequel film Advent Children, and even recreated certain screenshots of that moment. For example, at the beginning of the film, they recreated the scene of Cloud laying Aerith's body in the water. Another one was right before saving Tifa. Cloud sees a quick flashback of Aerith praying and Sephiroth rising from above her as he's about to stab her with a Masamune. And when Marlene senses Aerith's presence during Cloud's duel with Sephiroth at Midgar, a brief vision of her in her pose right before her death at Sephiroth's hand could briefly be seen. Aerith's death has also been adapted or referenced through some official merchandise. For example, the scene where Cloud lays Aerith's body to rest was depicted, among other Final Fantasy scenes, as a Codecast statue as part of Squaresoft's Final Fantasy Codecast collection. Only 3,000 of these Codecast were made, each coming with a card and card stand that has the statue's limited number and description. The series has been out of production since 1999, though. At 2008, Kotobukiya released another edition of the Aerith sculpture, which depicts Aerith praying for holy. The sculpture measures 43 centimeters in height and includes a stand. As for allusions to Aerith's death, a cool example would be in Smash Bros. Ultimate. The player can unlock an Advent Children Cloud Fighter spirit by performing a cross slash with a fully charged limit break. To commemorate the achievement, a picture is shown of Cloud holding Princess Zelda in water, similarly to when he was laying Aerith's body to the lake in the Forgotten City. Now that brings us to Final Fantasy VII Remake, which covers the Midgar portion of the original game. Unlike in the original localization, the remake gives her name as the more widely accepted Aerith rather than Aeris. Throughout the game, it's heavily implied that both Sephiroth and Aerith are aware of future events, or in other words, aware of events from the 1997 game. Because of this, as well as the game, the way the game ended, even the OG FF7 fans don't know what to expect from this remake trilogy, meaning that Aerith's death is no longer 100% guaranteed now. Throughout Remake, Cloud would occasionally get vague visions of her dying, and would probably continue getting these visions in Part 2, now known as Remake. Now there's a chance we will still get that iconic death scene adapted in Rebirth as well, but different, or due to the fact we defied fate at the end of the remake could mean we can actually canonically save Aerith from her fate. Or is this indeed a canon event that must happen no matter what? Those of you who have watched Across the Spider-Verse will know exactly what I'm talking about. Though, if you really want my opinion on what I think will happen in terms of Aerith's fate in Rebirth, again, check out the previous discussion I did about Aerith. So, with all that out the way, it's time for me to give my opinion on both deaths. First off, I want to just bring up the fact that I was spoiled on Aerith's death before I was ever even interested in the Final Fantasy story. And I was spoiled on Gwen's death before I even read any Spider-Man comics. Both are indeed well-known spoilers that have been memed to such a point that I generally get amazed whenever I meet people who haven't been spoiled with either one of them or one of them. At the early part of the video, I mentioned that many regard their deaths as the sole reasons that either character is even known today. But I don't necessarily agree with that. I'll agree they've become iconic for their death scenes, but Aerith in particular, compared to the classic version of Gwen Stacy, was a well-written character prior to her death. That's one of the things that really made her death so sad. She was truly a beloved character. Sure, Gwen had her fans, but thanks to watching casually Comics' video, which goes on a retrospective on Gwen's character prior to and after her death, it definitely was an eye-opener for me when looking at how her character was written back into the 1960s through 70s. Those comics mainly portrayed her as nothing more than Peter's girlfriend and Captain Stacy's daughter. They didn't give her much depth into her character as opposed to just someone who flip-flops as to whether or not she loves Peter or just can't stand him. She barely had her own character arc other than blaming Spider-Man for her father's death, but sadly that never got resolved. It's only the comics that were published after her death that tries to give her own identity and more of a personality of her own instead of being another generic girlfriend of a superhero hiding his identity to her. Again, it's only in the comics that either have flashbacks of her or in comics that are primarily set before her death at attempts to add more layers to her character. Examples of this being the 2020 Gwen Stacy comic series and the Spider-Man Blue series, the latter of which has been highly regarded as a must-read for all Spidey readers. Aside from that, I can see why there was such a high demand for Mary Jane to be Peter's girlfriend as opposed to Gwen Stacy during the early years of Spidey comics. MJ was just way more interesting. MJ had more iconic moments than Gwen ever had back then. Gwen's only memorable moment was sadly her death. You can't say the same thing for Aerith. As I said before, there was a reason why gamers were really saddened by her death. Honestly, I feel like the reason why Gwen's death got such a strong response from fans at the time was simply due to the fact that killing a superhero's girlfriend was never done before. Comic readers were shocked, and a lot of them didn't really know how to respond other than anger at the time. Nowadays, the decision to kill off Gwen is seen as one of the most groundbreaking moments in comic book history, and a good example of crafted storytelling. As for Aerith, her death, as I mentioned before, went well with the theme the devs were going for in the game, and it wasn't simply for shock value, nor was it to get clout with get Cloud with the other girl. It served a much greater purpose to the story. Plus, after her death, Aerith's spirit entered the live stream and continued having a role to play in the remainder of the game. Within the live stream, Aerith commanded the live stream itself to emerge from the planet and push Meteor back, allowing Holy to focus its energy. Thus, Holy and the live stream destroyed Meteor and saved the planet. So without Aerith in the live stream, then Meteor would have definitely destroyed the planet. And as I said before, Gwen's only defining moment was her dying. Now, in recent years, she's become one of the most popular characters in comics. Well, technically, an alternate version of her has become one of the most popular characters in comics. Spider-Gwen is the best thing that has ever happened to Gwen in terms of popularity, and she's just a way cooler character now. While I do feel bad for Gwen in terms of the fact that she was an innocent civilian that didn't deserve her life to end the way it did, I felt that the comics didn't do such a great job at making Gwen enduring enough for you to miss her character. If anything, the readers felt more bad for Peter than they did for Gwen, and she was the one who got killed. I feel like Final Fantasy VII did a way better job at making you really feel sorry for both Aerith and Cloud. When she was gone, a lot of players felt an empty void with her absence. Now, while I definitely prefer Aerith over Gwen as a character and preferred Aerith's death scene over Gwen's, in the long term, both deaths have made great contributions to, to their respective stories. Gwen's death not only pushed Mary Jane to being Peter's central love interest, but it also made Mary Jane a much deeper and well-written character, and not to mention made Spider-Man a much stronger character. Some regard her death as even more important to Spider-Man than, say, Uncle Ben's. With the death of Uncle Ben, it taught Spider-Man that he has to be responsible with the powers that he has. When he has the power to save someone and stop a bad guy, then do it. Don't use your powers for only selfish means. However, Gwen Stacy's death taught Spider-Man not to use his powers recklessly. As I mentioned before in the video, there were other ways he could have gone with saving Gwen from falling. And it also taught him that despite his powers, he can't save everyone. Though technically he already learned that with her father's death several issues prior to this. That one was different because her dad actually died a hero saving a kid from getting crushed, while Gwen was simply a damsel in distress that got murdered. Plus, with her dad, Spider-Man just wasn't quick enough to save him. While with Gwen, his webbing might have unintentionally killed her. Again, going back to him not using his powers irresponsibly and being smarter with them, which it did. With the help of MJ, Spider-Man was able to overcome his grief and learn from his mistake and become a better hero. It's still to this day, it's argued whether or not Peter Parker would even be with Mary Jane if not for Gwen's death. She died over 50 years ago, and it still influences the book on a weekly basis. And I have already stated what Aerith's death did for the plot of FF7, but there's one more thing I will mention, that what one person said in the comment section of my previous Aerith video, which is this. The overarching meta purpose for her of her death was to break Cloud out of his feelings of inadequacy. He was too weak to save his mother, so he assumed Zack's identity as a first-class soldier to cover up his disbelief in his lack of strength. When it happens again with Aerith, he is taken over by grief, and Sephiroth is able to take advantage of this. which is how he's able to force Cloud to give him the black materia. So when he falls into the live stream, it's Tifa's support that finally breaks him out of his feelings of inadequacy by specifically telling him that he is the one, that he was the one that saved her in her life in Nibelheim. He was able to break free from his dissociation because she was able to ground him into reality. It was Cloud's grief that set in motion his recovery. Because when he finally accepted himself over the deaths of his mom and Aerith, he was able to have the strength to defeat the weapons, and then ultimately Genova and Sephiroth. And I definitely got what they were saying. Aerith's death definitely added more cracks to Cloud's armor, his comfort zone, or in other words, made the cocky soldier attitude he had for most of the game to slowly diminish, which later led to a series of events for him to finally confront the truth of his true self. So, okay, I'll definitely give you that. The live stream scene with Tifa was definitely the final push needed for him to accept himself. So, as for the original Gwen, yes, she's only really remembered for her dying. However, with the Ghost Spider version of Gwen, the character has found new popularity, and now people love her character. I, for one, loved her character arc in the 2023 Spider-Verse film, and look forward to what the writers have in store for her character in the next sequel and her solo movie. And like I said before, Aerith isn't simply remembered solely for her death. Yes, it definitely elevated her legacy in gaming, but she was already mostly a beloved character for her design, theme song, gameplay, and how well written of a character she was and still is. Thanks to Remake, she's gotten even more popularity as it managed to really flesh out her character much more, which it'll make it all the more painful to see her die again if the writers of Rebirth does decide to go in that direction, that is. Well, that's it. Comment below, let me know which of these two deaths do you prefer? Which one do you think is more iconic? Which of the one has really resonated with you? Comment below and let me know. And also, which of these two do you prefer? Aerith or Gwen Stacy? Like I said, comment below and let me know. Now, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more videos like these, and most importantly, hit the notification bell to be notified for whenever I do post these videos. Now, with that said, stay beast.